I'm Derek Bateman. I'm joined today by Elaine C Smith, actress and board member for Yes Scotland.
Yes Scotland, yeah, and chair of the Independence Convention and all that, yeah.
But you're not that patronising woman on the Better Together ad then?
I wasn't asked. I'm furious. There'd been a queue of people. I feel quite sorry for the actress that was in there. She was just doing her job.
Because that's fame, is it not though? I mean, is that not a form of fame, that you get well known for something?
Well, there's a type of well-known you want to get, not for something that that really, the script wasn't good, and I couldn't get over just how quickly she seemed to make up her mind as well.
What did it say to you, Elaine, as a woman? I mean, I'm not trying to be funny here, but
no.
I thought it read to me a bit gauche, a bit contrived and trite. But then a lot of these, political broadcasts, they're overdone to get a message over. What was it, do you think, that kind of offended women in particular about that? Because it had this huge reaction. It's gone viral.
Yeah, the stuff that I've read from Guardian, as a feminist, you go, no, there's nothing wrong with having a woman in a kitchen. We all, I'm a career woman, but I've got a kitchen and I've got kids and I've got a grandchild and all of those sort of things. So I can understand the reasoning behind it to try and get in touch with a certain type. But the notion that she didn't have time to think about the referendum, for me, women aren't just one group. No. Men aren't either. We all think differently.
But the husband, Paul, or the partner, he'd made up his mind already, and he was nagging her, come on, you make up your mind.
He was saying, make up your mind. And I think certainly the women I've encountered over the last 2 years of campaigning care every bit as much on either side about what's going to happen. Also, the notion that that thing I said earlier about making her mind up so quickly.
Well, there was no evidence. She didn't say to herself, oh, I've just opened the paper.
And there's that, and there's the other thing. And now that I've considered that, I think that would be a good idea. So I'm of the belief that women are taking their time, or the women that haven't made up their minds already, are taking their time because they are considering it all, because they generally are in the poorest paid jobs. They are the ones who will bear the brunt of many of the social and welfare changes that may come from either side, and they are also not trusting of the men in suits who are busy telling them what they should be doing.
Well, wasn't it Margaret who said something like, that women actually are the kind of, the bedrock of society, because women actually do carry the load and the burden. Men pretend they do, in a way they do, isn't it?
Well, I've always sort of felt that in my stand-up. I do a whole bit about the fact that what we do is, particularly in the west of Scotland, we let men think that they are organising it all so as to keep the peace. Well, until we get pushed and there's a rally and then it all comes out. But generally, and I mean, that's very light about it. But I do think we're 52% of the population, and we want to consider on all levels. I didn't wake up one day and think, I think I'll support independence. This has been a journey of 20 years for me, from a left-wing socialist background to see that the systems that are in place now will not deliver what I believe in and what many, many thousand people, but more importantly, for the people that need it the most. And politics is just about how we organise ourselves. And this is Margaret MacDonald's...
This is not nationalism to you then? I mean, I regard myself as a Scottish nationalist, but for you, this is, as you say, a Labour background, and seeing a failure in the system which the system itself will not address.
And the system, I think, is incapable of addressing. I think when you have a system in Westminster, for me, I think is unfixable, unreformable. And it's not that I wasn't thinking it 20 odd years ago, I was, but I'm not going down the road of, because I'm from that left background, that notion of a tartan nationalism got a really, really bad press actually for a long time, and particularly in the left. There's a wonderful quote by Jerry Hassan where he said his parents, socialists from Dundee, basically viewed being Scottish as something you had to get over. And once you get over being Scottish, you'd be fine. I no longer believe that, but I was certainly brought up in a tradition that's had a cringe about itself and a cringe about any form of nationalism. Now I'm actually right over the fence, I suppose, and if you want to call it nationalism, call it whatever you want.
But the interesting thing, though, about this of 20 years ago and processes of democracy and government, I mean, a lot of us at that time looked to the Labour Party.
Yes,
did we? I mean,
much.
that was just that's why, in a way, the SNP was kind of, it was romantic, it was fringe, etc. Because you looked to Labour to make that change, and that's what I hear all the time if you're out on the road, public meetings, etc. A lot of these people, Scots, are actually Labour by instinct.
Yes.
And they have, I don't know, wakened up, had a moment of revelation and just thought, Labour is never going to do all of the things I want them to do.
Well, there's a great quote from Ed Miliband's father, Ralph Miliband, in the British Road to Socialism, where he says that the Labour Party, I'm paraphrasing, but the Labour Party exists to manage discontent. It's not there to really change anything, because it actually believes in the British state. It actually believes the British state is benign and that they are part of it. So they're there to go, oh, wait a minute, we need to get equal pay sorted, so we'll deal with that and we'll let that happen. Oh, we better deal with the workers a wee bit here, we'll let that happen. We'll let off steam and manage the discontent so that the British state stays the same. This is a massive threat now. Because this is the potential breakup of that. And the whole nationalism thing has been thrown into a different way for me as well. You know what? I don't understand why British nationalism's all right. The constant flag waving of Britain and out there selling Britain, but Scottish nationalism's bad. Why is that? How can one be good and one be bad? So I think too many of our own politicians, particularly from this part of the world, who, it's not what did the Romans ever do for us. Yes, certain changes were brought in. Leslie Riddoch and Blossom really enlightens us on that to a certain extent. That there is a link for my grandparents, because it was Labour that delivered an inside toilet, that took them out of slums, that put them into council housing. And there is a tribal loyalty to that because of where people had come from, and it is only 2 generations ago, so it's still in the DNA, if you like. But now for me it is about holding those people up to account and saying, wait a minute, so when we started to complain that we didn't all want our doors painted the same way, or that we didn't want certain things, we were seen as ungrateful. And it was a very paternalistic, top-down, macho view of how working class people should be. We live in a very different world now, and I think the corruption that has been involved in the expenses scandal. I live in the East End of Glasgow. The MP there was involved and retired, funnily enough, without charge. And I think there's a lot of discontent, and I have a lot of anger about the Labour Party on behalf of the people that voted for them.
Well, there's another thing just out this very day is there was a commission looking at the background of the people who are, the elite in Britain. Things like judges and military officers, journalists, so help me, and ministers and government, etc. I mean, the number of them who went to private schools is, massively disproportionate. The numbers who went to Oxford and Cambridge is exactly like 1% of the population, and yet they're 40% of the professions or something. I mean, there is something very British about that Labour haven't tackled either. The idea of social mobility, making sure that there really is a meritocracy in the UK. Hasn't happened.
Well, what they think is enough is to take one or two or three or a couple of cabinet ministers or whatever, working class kids into Oxford. You take them out and let them join, there's a great phrase that really rung true with me, let them join the leadership class, because that's the class we're talking about. And for me, a no vote is about saying to that few thousand people in London, in the city, the media, the judiciary, the House of Lords, the Parliament, all those public schools, saying to them, on yous go. You run it and you tell us what to do, because we're not good enough and we're not able enough. I had a friend, a woman I like very much, who's very different politically from me, say to me in a quite light discussion, she said, oh, but you have to remember, Elaine, there's no one here good enough to run anything. And it was like somebody slapping me because she was basically saying that to me. You're not good enough. It's like people who've said to me about sending their kids to private school. Well, I want them to speak properly. And what you're saying is you don't want them to speak like me.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had both Jim Sillars and your friend Alan Bissett, who wrote the play that you were in The Fringe, say the same story about having discussions with Scots. In fact, both of them were women, completely no ages apart, where they actually said, you know, but we're not good enough to run our affairs. That's why we allow, you know, Westminster, etc. The Scots are not good enough to run their own.
Because these people have been to better schools, and it's bred in somewhere. And I suffered from it for a long, long time as well. That the no good enough.
Didn't you go to Cheltenham Ladies College?
Yes, can't you tell? You know that I went to a comprehensive in Motherwell. I was brought up in a working class family. We were relatively well off. My father was a skilled worker. We had holidays, we had a car, we had all those things. But generally, you know, I had a mother who answered the phone going, hello, you know, pleased on holiday in Blackpool or Morecambe, saying, Jim, slow down, they don't understand what you're saying. That persistent cringe. And when I was doing Calendar Girls, I tell a story as well about being in Chichester, which is a beautiful place, lovely. But one of the things that really struck me was how many men there were still with their wives in their 80s. You don't see that in Glasgow. See, if you do a matinee in the King's Glasgow, it's women in their 70s, if they're lucky, not many in their 80s, but all the men are dead. The men don't live that long. Well, and so for me to look at the class of it, and they were lovely people, but they would say things to be like, oh, you are Scottish, oh, how lovely. And I'd be like, well, no, all the time, you know, but and I was like some exotic sort of a creature, and that here I was quite articulate.
You were okay, actually.
I was actually all right, you know?
Yeah. No, it's sort of an interesting approach to it, I think. But here's, just turn this round a minute, because people on the left, on the yes side, are raising questions now that if we win this, if there is a yes, what's the guarantee that the Scottish government, okay, it won't be the Conservative Party, I think everybody accepts that. But, you know, all politicians like to fit into a process, organise things, don't like too many uppity, you know, locals pointing fingers at them. You know, can we guarantee we will have a system that will be as responsive as you're describing there to the needs of working Scots?
Immediately,
because there isn't a guarantee of that, is there?
There's no guarantee. I mean, I've said, I actually had a joke with Alex Salmon at one point, because I'm not in a political party, don't want to be in a political party. And I did say to him, it's all right, Alec, I'm supporting you now. Wait till I'm in the barricades at the other side of the road. And he just laughed and said, oh, I'm looking forward to that. Because there will be issues. There will be big issues that we will disagree on in Scotland. But we also have to remember, 25% of the Scottish population vote Tory. They live here too. And Lib Dems and all that. And we have to find, I do not think a socialist utopia is round the corner is the real answer to that. And I think we will have to, but because of proportional representation, because of the way the Parliament is set up, I think that we have more chance of actually having a government that represents Scotland, and one that Scotland has voted for. If there are Tories in there, and if there are Lib Dems, if there are Greens, all the better, and far left socialists as well. It is a tragedy for me that what happened to the SSP happened. We'll not go into the details of that, but it effectively destroyed a party that could have been holding the balance of power at one point, you know, and making big changes for working people.
Do you have a British side? You know, this argument about that we're actually separating and don't go Scotland, and, you know, we're going to put a border up, or at least they're saying they'll put a border up. I mean, is that important? I mean, we will be neighbours and friends, obviously.
Yes, obviously.
But in terms of sharing stuff, I mean, are you quite at ease with that idea? I mean,
totally, totally at ease with it, because it's about sovereignty. For me, my mum and dad split up after 35 years, right, together in marriage. And it wasn't a good marriage for a long time, but my dad wasn't an abuser, he wasn't an awful man, he wasn't a horrible person, but the arrangement that they were entered into in 1951 didn't fit what happened in 1980, when my mother had gone back to university, when my mother was driving, the kids were grown up, when her life was complete. They were different people. My father couldn't understand, because he was much more traditional, why my mother would want to go. And I think it was Alison Pearson wrote a really good piece in the Telegraph the other day that the whole independence thing looked like the 5 stages of divorce in a way, you know. The first thing being denial that anything is wrong when whatever man or woman partner's going, I think we need to talk about this. This isn't really working for me. Yeah. Then the second stage would be, look, this really isn't working and I want out. Oh, don't be ridiculous. Well, we can't do that. We're not having that. Third stage, pleading. Please don't go. Please, the love bombing. We love you, please. And the fourth stage, when you say, no, I am intending to go, and it looks more and more likely, you're packing your case, then you get the rage. Well, you're not getting that, and you're not taking this. And in the end, yes, some lawyers will make a lot of money out of the stuff that's going on in Scotland, but arrangements and agreements will have to occur. And I have no problem in negotiating because when I looked at my mother after she'd left, it was difficult. It was hard for us all. She was in her own flat by that point, but what she had was sovereignty. And she never, ever regretted it. Till the day she died, she loved being able to have her own flat. She loved being able to manage her own finances. She loved being able to do what she wanted with her life. And for me, there's a real I feel like she's speaking to me. She's passed away now, but I feel that she's speaking to me about that. And that feeling that she had and any negotiations she then had with us or my father were on an equal basis.
Okay. Is Scotland going to start off in a flat then? Is that what you're saying?
Well, what I know is we'll be able to at least get HP for a washing machine. You know, devolution feels like you're still taking the washing home, you know.
Listen, are you kind of knocked off in a way, you know, kind of put off a bit, and your confidence goes down because of issues? You know, when we hear about the currency question, EU membership, and I mean, they're big, complex questions in a way. Does the feeling that you're expressing now, does it get shaken by any of those issues?
Sometimes. Sometimes I have a friend who is an ardent no, who's a multi-millionaire businessman, and we had a huge discussion. It wasn't a fight or anything like that, but it was very difficult, and he was adamant we were not going to get to use the pound, and England wouldn't let us use it, and all of that. And I did go to my bed feeling like I'd been in a boxing match a wee bit that night. And then what it made me do was I went online and I went in currency unions and looked up the experts. I read Stieglitz, I read the stuff. It's not just the SNP stuff, that this is the preferred option. This is the best at this point. And I have no problem with us moving on to another currency at some point in the future. In fact, I think that will probably happen. But at this stage, I know that whatever happens on September the 19th, we'll be using the pound. So, but it made me go and say, but I can also then understand why people get a bit freaked by it. You know, I laugh in daft ways and say, look, if it's Turnock's tea cakes, I'm happy. I want independence, hell or high water. But I understand why people get shaken. The EU didn't. I never for a moment thought that a country this advanced.
No. Well, that argument's pretty much disappeared.
Yes,
it's evaporated. It didn't come up at all in the debates, I think I'm right in saying.
Not at all.
And it used to be one of their bedrock issues.
The huge issue, yeah. So that initially, I thought, I don't really understand this. Then again, went away and read a bit more about it. And I thought, no, a country this advanced, this, you know, resource-rich, people-rich. I mean, that's what I think our currency is, us.
I'm always struck too at the moment, it's almost disappointing that the Better Together side seems not to be able to project a genuinely positive message. But I mean, I think there are positive things about United Kingdom. If you sat me down to write something, I could come up with a really credible script about, you know, why you should really think about staying in the UK. I don't hear that from them. I mean, in those two debates where Alistair was talking to Alec, I mean, yes, he's saying we're better together and stronger.
But why?
But basically, that is still a fear argument. That's a kind of negative argument. If you do that, this is the consequence. They seem to not be capable of articulating the genuine positive reasons why you might want to stay together. You know?
I think things have changed as well in that narrative. I understand lots of my Scots pals who left 30 years ago and went to London. I understand they were leaving a different Scotland. They were leaving a misogynistic, Labour-controlled hegemony.
Nationalism wasn't that attractive,
Nationalism,
as we said earlier.
Absolutely, was a narrow, tartan-kilted, you know, parody of itself, or what it seemed to be at that point, or it was certainly portrayed that way, until the likes of Margaret MacDonald and Jim Sillars and people like that came along. But to be progressive, particularly as a woman, and particularly as a performer, that you had to leave. And I think that is why people who've left and will feel a bit stateless in a way, because they're Scots who left because the opportunities weren't here, and in order to progress and get a decent career, things change. You know, I'm one of the first generation where I've been able to make a very, very good living in Scotland over 30 years through television and theatre and all of that. And I started to think, well, why is it wrong that I live and work in my own country? Why do I not feel as good as somebody who left and has got a job in a soap down south? That's madness.
Well, I mean, that's one of the reasons why Scotland needs foreign immigration today, is so many of our basically young people, basically talented people, for obvious reasons, depart to find. I mean, and you should. I mean, young people should obviously go
and see the world.
You should have that option, and you should have the chance to come home and make your career in whatever profession it is in your home country. And too few of our people can do that.
Well, it's because our young people are leaving because they have to. They had, and particularly generations before, in order to flourish, that's what you had to do. In order to grow, in order to find yourself in an environment that was encouraging. And there is a sort of cringe in Scottish culture to say, or there was for a long time, who do you think you are? Don't get above yourself. The Canadians call it the lobster pot mentality. You know,
this is good. Tell us that. What's that?
It's that when you're boiling a pot of lobsters, if one tries to get out, the others pull it back in. And coming from a mining village in Lanarkshire, you know, there's an immense pride amongst the people who are close to you, but other people, who does she think she is? And it's taken me a long, long time to get. Every artist, I think, has got that voice that says you're rubbish in your head, but I think it was incredibly loud in Scotland, and so. But I don't think that's the Scotland we live in anymore, and I think that's why Better Together, particularly the Labour side of it, to come back to your initial point, are finding it very, very difficult to articulate what it is that's better, particularly with the coalition in power, and also. I thought the question the other night in the debate for me that did it all was, if you really are saying we're better together, why are we not better together
It's
now?
been 300 years.
And
I suppose one of the unionist reply, of course, to what we were saying about Scots leaving, about immigration, is it's not really immigration because it's Britain.
Yeah.
You know, and if you regard I think the bedrock of the support for no, it sees its primary country as Britain, not Scotland. Sees Scotland quite happily as a region within the UK. And if Britain's your country, then that immigration issue just doesn't have the same resonance as you're applying to it. I think that's the way.
Yeah, I think I can see that, and I wonder why they don't articulate that more. But I've also found that people that say, no, I'm British first, tend not to want to be Scots. They tend not like being Scottish very much. That there are too many things about being Scottish they don't like. So being British makes them feel that they're. I mean, I had you know, saying I don't want to live in a wee diddy country and all that. You know, and I was like, well, where are we diddy? You know, Britain is. You know, who do you think you are? America? No, we're not. And there is also a notion, I think, about Scotland and that sense of being this wee country. What will make me very embarrassed, actually, on the 19th of September, if we vote no, will be, oh my God, where are we? We couldn't even vote for ourselves. Yeah. But as you rightly say, the unionist argument would be, well, Scots are voting for themselves because they believe they are better within the union. And that is a legitimate argument to make, I think, but I don't think they're making it very well.
We'll see if that's the argument that comes from the right-wing Tories and UKIP after a no vote right enough. Just to sort of...
Yeah, we're looking at Boris and Nigel, you know, Prime Minister down the line. That's the other thing for me, is that it seems that people think a no vote means everything stays the same. and it doesn't.
No.
What I'm seeing on the horizon is really, really bad. And I've noticed that all those voices that for a few years have been calling us subsidy junkies, scroungers, living off the English taxpayer, deliberately just miscalculating and looking at how we divvy up our budget, that we're not getting extra money for the things that we're doing. These are just our priorities. That's all gone very quiet. Those voices will be very, very loud after a no vote, I think.
There is this theory that in referendums, that on polling day, the undecideds are much more likely to move, just to stick, rather than twist, they'll stick and say, well, I'm not happy, but status quo for me. The problem here is there isn't a status quo as such at all. It's a movable feast, and the fact that the no side has failed, collectively as parties, to put together a coherent package that you can look at and say, well, I agree with that part, this part, you cannot do that.
No.
So it's what are you voting for if you vote no? I mean, apart from Britain, I get that, but if you don't feel that British thing, in terms of a package for the Constitution, I mean, it's a complete unknown factor.
I don't think that's the problem. I don't think people know, even those, as you say, who are undecided and thinking about the status quo, they don't know what Britain means anymore. The Britain that my dad fought for as a tail gunner in the RAF, the proudest time of his life, is not the Britain. My dad was 82, before he died, was voting SNP. And he had been solid Labour all his life because he fought for Britain. He worked in Clyde Crane Engineering Works. He was in British Steel, but there was British Steel, there was the Pits, there was British Telecom. There were all these things that made Britain, and also that thing of it, they built it. They built it in the 5 years from 1945 to 1950. How wonderful. Let's build a better place. Let's build a welfare state. By the 80s, all they had fought for, all they had built for was being dismantled. And that move away to the right, to that neoliberal sort of economics, and the look at and therefore what he had fought for didn't exist anymore. And I do think that that's part of the argument. What do you say is British anymore, apart from a flag, when the city owns it all? Or when individuals own it all, where the population all over Britain, and this applies in Yorkshire and Liverpool and the West Country as well, when what is the notion of being British anymore? So I think that again feeds into the inability of Better Together to really articulate that to the population. But I was just going to finish with those. Somebody said to me very funnily, they said, you do realise that on the actual day of the election, at least 10% of the population are going to walk in there and they're just going to look and go, bugger it. And yes.
Yeah.
And I'm sort of optimistic that may happen.
Just to finish on that point, I mean, how do you feel about it? I mean, there's an opinion poll out today, a proper one done by ICM in this city, in Glasgow, which put yes ahead at 51-49. Okay, margin of error and all that. Nevertheless, I mean, how do you read it, and how confident are you?
Well, I certainly have been concentrating as many of my efforts as I can. I said I don't really want to go to yes meetings. I don't want to go and do lots of rallies. I want to speak to people. So I've been doing Castlemilk, Barrowfield, out in those areas where people haven't voted for a long, long time, and where people are afraid of losing the little that they've got. And I have seen a change. I mean, I saw the change 10 years ago when John Mason won the East End seat.
That's not 10 years ago, is it?
It must be now, 10 years ago, 8 years ago at least, yeah. Wow. And that was a real shift, and that was people just being, I was in Easterhouse canvassing, and I couldn't believe that particularly the Catholic vote and things like that were actually moving in a way. And I remember walking into a house with Alex Salmon, of all people, and I'd never really been on the stump or anything like that. And there was a lovely old man, and he had the picture of the Pope on the wall and all that. And as we went in, he shook Alex's hand and said, "Time for a change, eh, Alex?" And that's when I thought, oh, wait a minute, this is not something I even would ever have considered that vote would have moved. That was that solid Labour vote, but feeling let down, feel it, and also if they don't win Glasgow, I don't see how Yes can win, you know, the rest of Scotland. But I think there is a significant shift, and if the vote gets out, there is a groundswell. And I noticed that I spoke at the People's Festival in Edinburgh as well, and they were on their feet at the end. You know, it was John McCallion and myself against the Better Together, and it wasn't us that were winning. It was the people sitting there. Not all nationalists by any manner of means, but there is a rage at Labour. And I think in its heartlands, if you can motivate that rage to go and vote, then we may see a difference. But to be honest, I can't call it. I don't, you know, I'd love to. I've people saying, oh, we're going to sort of, I have no idea.
Okay, well, let's hope it's a yes.
Let's hope it's a yes.
Elaine, thanks very much.
My pleasure.